So Captain America Brave New World didn't exactly take the box office by storm, and its critical reception was mixed at best, and it got me thinking. I used to hold the Captain America franchise in such high regard, but now that we've had a mediocre Captain America movie, where does it sit among the MCU franchises? What's the worst MCU franchise? Does every franchise have a mediocre movie? And what's the best MCU franchise? And when I say franchise, I don't just mean single superhero. I mean superhero with at least 2 movies. So Spider-Man, Iron Man, the Avengers, Captain Marvel. So today, in the aftermath of a mixed Captain America movie, I'm going to be ranking the MCU franchises. First things first, like, subscribe, and comment your rankings. Even if you haven't seen every single franchise in the MCU, what are your top 3 that you have seen? And second, some rule clarifications. If you look up ranking MCU franchises, a lot of people don't include Captain Marvel. Maybe that's because they don't see the Marvels as a direct sequel and it's more of a Miss Marvel sequel. But to me, it's really just Captain Marvel 2, so I'm including it here because I see it as a true sequel. Also, no Deadpool. Those first 2 movies are clearly not in the MCU, so I don't think we should include the franchise. But as for the franchises we will be including, we have 10 of them. Ant-Man, the Avengers, Black Panther, Captain America, Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy, Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Thor. So those are the 10 contenders. Without further ado, let's do this. In 10th, and maybe surprising some people, including myself, we have the Thor franchise. At first I thought it would rank a lot higher considering Thor Ragnarok is one of my favorite MCU movies. But when you take a step back and you look at Thor, Thor the Dark World, Thor Ragnarok, and Thor Love and Thunder, that's a very mixed collection of movies. Kenneth Branagh's Thor, one of the OG Phase 1 MCU movies, it's pretty okay. I'm never dying to go back to it or feel any nostalgia for it. And in comparison to some others, I think it's a pretty unremarkable Phase 1 movie. Then you have Thor the Dark World, which for a long time was considered the bottom of the barrel for the MCU. But now you could argue there's been some worse offenses, and rewatching Thor the Dark World for this video, it has a lot more heart than some of the recent MCU entries, and I actually really enjoy all of the Loki stuff with it, especially his relationship with his mother, played by Rene Russo, but still, not a great movie. Then we have Thor Ragnarok, the only true remarkable film of these 4 for me. It breaks away from the MCU formula, has an awesome team up with Hulk, and it's just a hilarious space action comedy. I also think it has like one of the best villains with Cate Blanchett as Hela. Also has some other fantastic characters and power upgrades for Thor, but most of all, it really strikes the balance of humor and drama, and the use of Immigrant Song is good. But then Thor Love and Thunder, another Thor dud, a wasted villain, ugly CGI, and really trying to be Ragnarok in all the worst ways. So having stepped back, as much as I love Chris Hemsworth as Thor in all of the movies, and the character of Thor himself, the Thor franchise really only has one great movie, and that's why it's in last. Alright, in 9th place and not in last, which I'm sure will piss off that creepy dude on the bus who sits a little too close and has a staring problem, it's the Captain Marvel franchise. I actually don't think either of these movies are bad, I just think they're incredibly forgettable, and one of them is extremely derivative. Captain Marvel, a 2019 movie that was the bridge between Infinity War and Endgame. I like Brie Larson, and some of the Skrull stuff approaches being interesting, but the movie itself just feels like it's trying to be a bunch of other MCU movies, like the Guardians movies that use a great 70s, 80s aesthetic and music from that time. Captain Marvel has a nostalgia for the 90s just because, and tries to implement needle drops with Come As You Are and I'm Just a Girl that just really don't work for me. Then we have The Marvels from 2023, a movie that was fun, but I didn't take a single thing away from it. I literally couldn't remember the villain's name 5 minutes after watching it. Now I know it's Dar-Ben, but so much of The Marvels is just forgettable. It's not awful because I do like the team up of our trio. There's a fun sort of musical number, and Canadian legend Iman Vellani is just so good as Miss Marvel, but I'd rather watch her in Miss Marvel. So with 2 forgettable and mediocre installments, the Captain Marvel franchise is in 9th. Alright, next up in 8th place we have the Ant-Man franchise. Look, even if it's delivered probably the worst MCU movie with Quantumania, it's definitely not the worst franchise. Ant-Man, the final film in Phase 2 leading us into Captain America Civil War, was a perfectly fine and fun origin story. Paul Rudd is a really great casting choice, it's got a pretty good villain, and it has a great family humor aspect to it. Then we have Ant-Man and the Wasp, another bridge between Infinity War and Endgame. Now I had only seen Ant-Man and the Wasp once in theaters, and I remember thinking it was fine, but upon rewatch, I was sort of shocked to say Ant-Man and the Wasp kinda rules. It's absolutely hilarious. I love the inclusion of Walton Goggins, a cameo from Tim Heidecker, and even if Ghost isn't the most memorable villain, I really love the special effects with her powers, so I'll happily defend Ant-Man and the Wasp. But what I won't defend, and what I couldn't possibly defend, is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. What a weird movie. It's not the worst thing I've ever watched in my life, and I think there is actually potential for a really great movie in there, but the end product is so bland and frankly boring. I'm not a big fan of the cast of this movie. Like, I think Catherine Newton as Cassie just doesn't really work for me. Then you have the return of Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas, and the addition of Bill Murray, which all three of them just seem like they don't want to be there. It's also just an incredibly ugly movie. Everything is just so plasticky and all this blending of colors into a nice smudge brown. It's an eyesore. But still, with one decent movie, one really good movie, and one misfire, I think the Ant-Man franchise isn't that bad, so it gets 8th place. Okay, before we get into the top 7, I want to make this very clear. I like all of the remaining franchises. In fact, I like all of the remaining movies except one. So with that being said, in 7th place we have the Doctor Strange films. I watched the first Doctor Strange movie from 2016 a few times. And no, it's not revolutionary, it's a pretty standard origin story, but I think there's a lot of fun and really great stuff in there. I'll start with the cast. Benedict Cumberbatch is a great Doctor Strange. He's arrogant as hell, but he plays the obsessive, intelligent guy so well, and the supporting cast is fantastic too. Chiwetel Ejiofor, Rachel McAdams, Tilda Swinton, Benedict Wong. Everyone's kinda great, and Mads Mikkelsen is a really good villain. I think it has a lot of cool magical effects, and I really enjoy Stephen Strange exploring his powers. Even if Scott Derrickson doesn't put the most flair or go into the craziest spells possible, I think the action's solid, and I love Michael Giacchino's score. Then we have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Again, I had only seen this movie once in theater, so it was nice to go back and rewatch it. I think it's just as good as the first Doctor Strange movie, of course, and Sam Raimi really goes nuts with some fun spells and visual stuff, and Elizabeth Olsen just pops off as Scarlet Witch. But I think the Illuminati aren't that interesting, specifically John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic, but still, I think the movie is a lot of fun, even if it doesn't quite deliver the multiverse aspect for me, which, to be frank, I'm just sick of the multiverse in general. So with two solid and very rewatchable movies, the Doctor Strange franchise is in 7th. Alright, as we move up, I'm getting more and more nervous, but in 6th place, we have the Black Panther franchise. Ryan Coogler has delivered 2 amazing Black Panther films all about grief. One of them grieving an in-universe death, and one of them grieving a very tragic real-life loss. It goes without saying, Chadwick Boseman was a phenomenal Black Panther. When he showed up in Civil War, my head exploded. Literally embodied royalty every minute he was on screen. And for my money, he's one of the best casting choices in the MCU. I'll actually never forget the moment I learned of his passing on August 28th, 2020. I was working a closing shift at McDonald's. We were working till midnight. It was late. I checked my phone when it was super quiet, and the first post I see is from Variety saying that Chadwick Boseman had passed away after a long battle with cancer. Like a lot of people, I could not believe it. He had been fighting this unbelievable battle in private for years. Everyone had come to love Chadwick Boseman, not just as an artist, but as a person, and it was a tremendous loss. So from grieving a fictional king in the first Black Panther movie in 2018, a wonderfully entertaining and politically complex movie, we move into Black Panther Wakanda Forever, where it felt like the fictional and the reality were in sync, grieving the loss of a beloved leader. Again, this was one of the movies that I rewatched because I had only seen it once in theaters, and it was an extremely emotional watch. It's not a perfect story, and I think it goes on a little bit too long, but it handles a loss with so much love and care, and it's sort of a miracle it works at all. Also, Namor is just an amazing villain. The Black Panther franchise is culturally rich, it's emotional, and it's just so heartwarming, and that's why it's my 6th favorite MCU franchise. But alright, in 5th place, and where I possibly start to lose people and the arguing starts, the Iron Man trilogy. I remember seeing the first Iron Man movie in theaters 3 times. I was 8 years old and it was astonishing. Jon Favreau's Iron Man, the origin point of the MCU, is still one of the very best MCU movies, and honestly, it might be one of the best superhero movies. Great effects, a great redemption arc, and inspired casting with Robert Downey Jr. And watching it now after 36 MCU movies and multiple TV shows, it's so refreshing how how small scale and contained it is. A guy in a suit fighting another guy in a suit over control of their company. No fan service, no insane nostalgia jerking. It's just focused on telling a good story. And Tony revealing that he is Iron Man at the end of the movie, just flawless, no notes. Then we have Iron Man 2, which is definitely a step down, but a movie I still really like. Whiplash is fun, and I freaking love Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer. The Black Widow storyline has some scenes that have aged a little weirdly, but it's cool to go back and see Scarlett Johansson introduced to the MCU. As for Iron Man 3, a very different movie from the two previous installments, but still a lot to enjoy. It's fun seeing Tony get the Spider-Man 2 treatment where he loses his suit. Maybe the whole Sir Ben Kingsley, Trevor Slattery Mandarin reveal isn't that great, but at least we got the real Mandarin in the future. Also, I love Guy Pearce, so it's really cool to see him here. So even though the Iron Man trilogy maybe fluctuates in quality, I think even the worst parts have some fun stuff. So 5th place it is. Alright, in 4th place, I want to say with this franchise, I could understand any ranking for it. I see why people love it, I see why people hate it, but I think it's pretty good. And that franchise is the Spider-Man trilogy. Production-wise, maybe not the best. Apart from his homemade suit in Homecoming, which I absolutely love, I'm not a big fan of the painted-on CGI suits. I like something a little more physical like Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire's. And I think John Watts is very much a plug-in and play director, like the Russo brothers, who are just supervisors but don't really have a creative vision or a creative flair. And maybe some of the CGI in No Way Home specifically is not that great. But these 3 movies are just so much fun and just feel so Spider-Man. Let's start with Homecoming. It's my 4th favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. It's so ground level, contained, easy to follow, and fun. It's a high school kid just wanting to prove himself. I think the inclusion of Iron Man and Happy are great. The high school classmates, the humor, the villain, it's all just so A+ to me. Zendaya is fantastic as MJ. Jacob Batalon as Ned is such a fun friend for Peter Parker. Marissa Tomei is a wonderful Aunt May. But most of all, I think Tom Holland is so good as Spider-Man. It's a very fun high school superhero movie, and I just love Homecoming so much. Then we have Far From Home, a movie that at first I was hesitant that they were taking Peter out of New York already, but with another great villain, a really good romantic storyline, and some fun foreign hijinks, it's still very enjoyable. And the Mysterio stuff just looks really great, and Jake Gyllenhaal seems to be having so much fun, so it's just a good sequel. Then we have No Way Home to cap off the trilogy. I actually think it's the worst of the 3. The ending of Far From Home sets up so much fun stuff that sort of just gets wrapped up in the first 10 minutes of No Way Home, all because Peter has a good lawyer. And I love the inclusion of Matt Murdock, but that is a fan service moment erasing the previous film. And I think that's just a good thesis for No Way Home. Fan service over story. I remember walking out of the theater from No Way Home being like, that was the best thing I've ever watched. Oh my god. And then I thought about the story for more than 10 seconds and realized not a lot of that really had to happen, and it sort of just crumbles. However, I can forgive all of those sins because having my 3 Spider-Men on screen is so great. Spider-Man is probably my second favorite superhero behind Batman. I adored the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies growing up, and I still do. I think No Way Home also just has really fun villains and a super emotional ending. And I really like Aunt May being the one who said, with great power comes great responsibility. So overall, the Homecoming trilogy, as it's called, is a lot more positives than negatives. Tom Holland, again, he's an astounding Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and that's why he's my favorite one, because he does both. And that's why his Spider-Man franchise is the 4th best MCU franchise. Alright, we're in the top 3. As if picking between Iron Man and Spider-Man wasn't hard enough, the next 3 were painful to sort. But in 3rd, I have the Captain America franchise. 3 very rewatchable movies, and the 4th that I probably won't rewatch unless I have to. Let's start with Captain America: The First Avenger. It's a wonderful, corny, 40s style origin story. Chris Evans knocks it out of the freaking park. He is a perfect Captain America. And Hugo Weaving as Red Skull is really good. I love the makeup, I love all of his weapons and the special effects around him. It also has a really heartbreaking ending after some wonderful development between Peggy and Steve. Then we have Captain America: The Winter Soldier, easily in my top 5 MCU movies, and one of my favorite superhero movies ever. Chris Evans steps it up. Sebastian Stan is amazing as the Winter Soldier, and Scarlett Johansson is so good as Black Widow. And the story itself, like the MCU when it's at its best, is actually about something. There is a lesson here that just happens to be in a superhero movie. Fighting wars before they've begun, questioning those in power, not giving up on justice and freedom just because others have. The Winter Soldier just freaking rocks and actually has a lot of things that you can talk about after. As for Captain America Civil War, not as good, but just as fun. I mean, the introduction of Spider-Man, Black Panther, and Zemo all really work for me. I think what makes me like it less than The Winter Soldier is honestly just the production value and the dialogue. It feels like that's when we started to get a lot of cutting corners with CGI, wigs looking worse, and backgrounds just looking like gray haze. And as for the dialogue, I think there's just too many quips and Marvel humor jokes. As for the story of Civil War, I actually have no issues with it, and I think it's really good. They translate the Hero Registration Act really well to live action with the Sokovia Accords. There's just certain little things that upon a rewatch 9 years later are kind of meh, but I still really love Civil War. But Captain America Brave New World, the worst Captain America movie by a long shot, is a real low point for this franchise. Bad CGI, a clumsy story, forgettable villains, and it's such a stale political thriller. It's a movie that's only interested in looking at the past of the MCU instead of trying to introduce anything new. Still, I think the first 3 Captain America movies make up for Brave New World, which is a shame because I really wanted Anthony Mackie to have a good Captain America movie because I think he's awesome in the MCU. So with 2 great movies, 1 amazing movie, and 1 mediocre movie, the Captain America franchise is the 3rd best MCU franchise. Okay, in second place, numero dos, deuxième place, the runner-up, the Avengers franchise. In these 4 movies, I really only have critiques for 1 of them. Otherwise, it's all sunshine, baby. Let's start with 2012's The Avengers. A life-altering experience for 12-year-old Kiki. Another MCU movie I saw multiple times in the theaters. Rewatching The Avengers, it's such a perfectly balanced team-up movie. It really gives all of our characters a chance to shine. It lets them learn how to work as a team. And it has such a great villain with Loki, who's actually working for a bigger villain in Thanos. And it just has some insane lines, like Tony Stark saying, "I have a plan, attack," or Dr. Banner being like, "That's my secret, Captain, I'm always angry." And of course, Captain America telling Hulk, "Smash." Just so much fantastic stuff to enjoy in the Avengers. Then we have Age of Ultron, which is definitely not as good, but there's still a lot I like about it. James Spader absolutely cooked as Ultron, but Elizabeth Olsen and Aaron Taylor-Johnson are not good as the Maximoff twins. She definitely gets better, leading to her best performance in Multiverse of Madness, I would say, whereas Aaron Taylor-Johnson, well, he never really got the chance to get better. It's a pretty messy story and has so many weird choices like Dr. Banner and Natasha, and Joss Whedon's quips and general writing of women in his stories is just not good. Like Black Widow literally saying, "You boys," every second line. The 3rd act has always been a bit of a slog, but overall the movie does have some stuff to enjoy. But then we have Infinity War and Endgame, which are both spectacular to me. Bringing all these characters together in a crazy way, delivering a phenomenal 2-part conclusion to the Infinity Saga. Josh Brolin is great as Thanos, there's awesome team-ups to enjoy, and to be frank, yes, there's a lot of fan service and nostalgia stuff, but with these 2 movies wrapping up a huge overarching story, it always feels okay and sort of earned. And the last 30 minutes of Endgame would genuinely make my 10-year-old self piss my pants, and not just because I was a bedwetter. And now looking back, we were so lucky with those 2 movies, because given the current state of the MCU and how the Russo brothers continue to sell out, I think Doomsday and Secret Wars are going to absolutely stink. So I hold on to these 4 Avengers movies even tighter and remember the good times, while knowing it's probably all downhill from here. But the Avengers franchise is my 2nd favorite MCU franchise. First place, my favorite MCU franchise. You're a smart cookie and can probably guess what it is, but the best MCU franchise is the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. For my money, a perfect trilogy. If you had told me in 2013 that the Guardians of the Galaxy would be my favorite MCU franchise, I would have said the Guardians of the Whoamawadi, and yet here I am in 2025 singing the praises of James Gunn and our misfit cast of wacky characters. The introduction of the Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014 sort of changed the world, and is something that many have tried and failed to replicate. The movie changed careers, it changed comic book movie soundtracks forever, and it changed the possibilities of who could be in a team-up movie. The first Guardians movie is just dynamite all around. Again, a great villain working for the larger threat in the MCU, amazing team dynamics, and astounding character development. By the end of the movie, you'd really die for these people. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is also an awesome movie. It really adds some fun stuff with the Ravagers and Mantis and Ego. I think Kurt Russell is awesome as Ego, and the father-son, stepfather-stepson dynamic works so well between Ego, Peter, and Yondu. It's wonderful, and of course, the soundtrack is great. Finally, we have what is, in my opinion, one of the best conclusions to a superhero saga or just action movie movie saga in general, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It's absolutely wild to remember that Marvel Studios fired James Gunn and this movie almost didn't happen. I loved the third movie so much and sobbed uncontrollably in theaters. And I've avoided rewatching it up to now because I knew this is gonna hurt. And what do you know, rewatching it last week, I was a freaking mess. To me, the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is perfect because it explores every character's past while also highlighting the different types of family dynamics. The first movie is about finding family and love and admitting that you don't have to live alone. We all have painful pasts, but it's okay to move on and be happy. Volume 2 explores the complicated relationships from your past life when you've moved on and found a new family. Peter meeting his real father, Gamora and Nebula coming to terms with their familial past, and I love Peter accepting Yondu as his real father before Yondu's sacrifice. Then Volume 3 is about how families are complicated, and there comes a time when you have to branch out and maybe grow separately. Guardians 3 just does so much wonderful stuff like Rocket's origin and his past scars, or Gamora being from another dimension and not falling in love with Peter Quill again. And then the whole ending with the Guardians realizing this is it eats me up inside. Just because we aren't together doesn't mean we aren't family. It doesn't mean we don't love each other, and it doesn't wipe away the memories that we have together. And obviously the use of Dog Days Are Over makes me weep uncontrollably. It's like in Civil War when they start reading the words to Bucky and he starts tweaking. All three Guardians of the Galaxy movies are just so emotionally intelligent, well crafted, and really pack a punch. They never feel bogged down by a greater universe or anything like that. It's always about one group and one group only, the Guardians. And that's why the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is the best MCU franchise. So there you have it, the MCU franchise is ranked. It's sort of a weird time to talk about the MCU because we have clearly hit a peak in quality and we have been struggling to find that quality since Endgame. But I don't want to make a whole video hating on the MCU. That's not fun to me because I think there are so many great movies in this franchise. So if you enjoyed these rankings and you enjoyed me blabbing, you can enjoy more of my blabbing on my podcast, Watcher of All Things. It's my weekly show where I talk movies, TV shows, and all things entertainment with new episodes dropping every Monday. You can find it on all streaming platforms or right here on my wonderful YouTube channel. But for now, make sure you're hitting like, subscribe, and comment your rankings below, and turn on notifications so you know whenever a new video or a podcast episode drops. But this was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
He almost tasted that. Num 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 num, eat it up. Go play okay, 3, 2, 1. You know I'm the hottest.